final video of 1st and 2nd Nephi, the series on 1st and 2nd Nephi. I'm going to go ahead and knock this off today, and that way I can shift to other things. But I hope that it's been useful to you. Now, something I wanted to say about chapter 23 of 2nd Nephi before we go to chapter 24 is the opening image of the gathering of the hosts, the armies of the Lord. The lifting of the banner, we've talked about that in a previous chapter, Isaiah 5, and Isaiah 11 spoke of the ensign as well, and we talked about that in terms of the restoration and the Book of Mormon coming forth and so forth. So the assembled armies, in verse 2 of the last chapter, 23, maybe that's implied as well with the word banner, because again, the word ensign is also used there. And it helps, so when the people of the earth gather around the doctrine of Christ and to the ordinances, they're gathered through the Book of Mormon and through those things that we've been speaking about, and then they can qualify to go into the gates of the nobles, if it does refer to temples. Okay. Now, in an earlier image, in chapter 12 of 2nd Nephi, we saw the temples of the Lord, the mountain of the Lord's house would be established in the top of the mountains, and then we saw judgment follow in that chapter as well. So the same sequence in chapter 12 is the same pattern and sequence found in chapter 23, where the righteous are, the temples are discussed, or the righteous are discussed as gathering to holy places, and then judgments falling upon the nations. So chapter 23 was about the judgments upon the nations of the earth, that the nations will have an end, but the Lord's people will be gathered and preserved and abide the day. That's similar to what may be suggested in chapter 12, where the two mountains were discussed, the mountain of the Lord, and then of course the wicked who flee to the mountains to hide their idols because the Lord's judgment is coming upon them. So I think I should have mentioned that last time. I think that's a really interesting connection between chapter 12 and 23. Now chapter 24, if chapter 23 is about the end of the nations, chapter 24 seems to be more focused on the end of Satan, that is, his being kind of overcome. Now, granted, historically speaking, this prophecy had to do with the king of Babylon. Now, remember, Babylon's future to Isaiah, so he's prophesying about the Babylonian captivity. He's prophesied about. Now, this is about the deliverance from Israel from their Babylon, their enemies having to do with Babylon, and later with Assyria and the Philistines are mentioned towards the end. But these first 3 or 4 verses are very, very hopeful. They're they cause us to want to rejoice, particularly if we apply them not only to the situation of returning from Babylon in 530 BC, Israel returns to the lands of their inheritance and builds the second temple, and the Lord is preparing the way so that the Jews can be present in Jerusalem when Jesus himself comes among them. But this can be applied also, as many of the prophecies, or most of them, to our day, and I like to apply it that way mostly. But verse 1 says, "For the Lord will have mercy." This is a promise. The Lord will have mercy yet upon Jacob, and will yet choose Israel, and set them in their own land, and the strangers shall be joined with them. The believing Gentiles will be adopted into the covenant, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. Those that are brought in to the covenant are essentially cleaving unto the people of the Lord. Whereas in the last chapter, remember, those that were destroyed had been joined to the wicked. So you need to cleave, we need to cleave, and the believing Gentiles need to cleave unto the house of Jacob, and of course to the blessings that are found in and through among the Lord's people. Verse 2, "And the people shall take them and bring them." Now this has application. So the Persians brought the Israelites back to their lands under Cyrus. Cyrus is spoken of in the book of Isaiah, in the second half of the book of Isaiah. Remember, the second half of the book of Isaiah is about about redemption and deliverance, and a lot of it has to do with Babylon. Whereas the first part of where these chapters are coming from has to do with judgment, and this so Cyrus allows the Jews to return, and he allows them to rebuild. The Persians then, but this also could be applied to Isaiah 49, where we know in the latter day the Gentiles would be a fatherly kind of paternal figure to the house of Israel, helping them return to their lands, and they would be merciful unto them and assist them in establishing themselves again in their lands to some degree, and that's discussed at the end of 1 Nephi. So much of this is, returning us there. But anyway, the Lord says, I will show mercy yet upon my people. Verse 2, and the people shall take them and bring them to their place, or to their lands, yea, from far unto the ends of the earth. In other words, they'll gather to the nations from which they've been, they'll gather, they'll be gathered to the lands of their inheritance, and they shall return to their lands of promise. And the house of Israel shall possess them. In other words, they will be adopted, they will be able to cleave to the house of Israel through the ordinances of the priesthood and because of the preaching of the word. And the land of the Lord shall be for servants and handmaids. Now, this could refer to anywhere where the saints are gathered. Will be for servants and handmaids, and they shall take them captives unto whom they were captive. So there's going to be a reversal here. Remember, they were oppressed. They're now going to rule over their oppressors effectively, and they shall rule over their oppressors is the final promise in verse 2. And verse 3 says, and it shall come to pass that the day that the Lord shall give thee, that at that day the Lord shall give thee rest. So these are promises of millennial rest, and of course once they're gathered, they can experience and enter into the rest of the Lord. In this world as well as in the next. For thy sorrow and thy fear, again, in your scattered condition, and from the hard bondage wherein you were made to serve, you can be redeemed and you can be delivered. And you will be, I promise you, if you'll believe in Christ and come unto him through the Book of Mormon and enter into the covenant. And it shall come to pass in that day that thou shalt take up this, and it says proverb, but it's more of a taunt. So that's Gileadi's word. It's more of a taunt, and so I like this. They will take up a taunt against the king of Babylon and say, and then the taunt runs for most of the chapter all the way through verse 23. This is those that are gathered, the redeemed, the gathered to Israel that have entered the covenant and have been redeemed through Christ and through the priesthood power and so forth. They will take up a taunt against the king of Babylon, symbolically Satan, historically, literally the king of Babylon, who had destroyed the Jews and taken them captive under the Persians. They've returned, and of course they're taking up this taunt against the king of Babylon, the kings of Babylon, under which they've suffered and been afflicted and so forth and been oppressed. All right, but let's take it in as it applies to Satan. Now, this is definitely built into this, but I wanted to just say Gileadi kind of helps me with something. This is really interesting. This is one of his discoveries, actually. That chapter 24 has a strong parallel relationship in the structuring of the book of Isaiah. Chapter 24 has a strong parallel relationship to Isaiah 53, which you will recognize is one of the special chapters, messianic chapters, in the book of Isaiah. It's also quoted in other places in the Book of Mormon. Abinadi spend some time with it and so forth. Isaiah 53 is the most powerful messianic passage we have, I think, in the whole Old Testament. It's a great chapter, right? About the Lord and about his suffering and his burden and his death and resurrection. Excuse me. Anyway, this chapter, Gileadi says, seems to be a parallel to that, but a reverse parallel. So this is a satanic passage about the harrowing of hell. And in 53, we learned that the Messiah would, be among the dead. He would die, and that he would, it's suggested that he would be, I forget exactly all the language, but anyway, the resurrections alluded to the idea of the harrowing of hell, these types of things, which are kind of fundamental to our Messianic, our doctrines relative to the Messiah. These are somewhat indicated in a reverse and satanic way in this chapter. So this will be the taunt. How hath the oppressor ceased? The golden city, Babylon, ceased. The Lord hath broken the staff of the wicked, the scepters of the rulers. In other words, the Lord has crushed the nations, and Babylon is one of those nations he has crushed. And so how is it that, your rule has ceased? He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in anger, is persecuted himself, and none hindereth from him from being persecuted, buffeted by the laws of justice and the the punishments of God. The whole earth is at rest. This is a millennial image. The whole earth is at rest, since you are and is quiet, and they break forth into singing, since you have been defeated. Verse 8, and the fir trees, even the proud, rejoice at thee, and the cedars of Lebanon, and the very trees of the earth. I mean, you can say that the very trees of the earth rejoice at thee. So the earth rejoices because wickedness is swept off of her face. But also the trees can represent the pride of men. These things they rejoice at thee, because in a sense, you have brought them also to ruin. So verse 8 says, since thou art laid down, no feller has come up against us. Okay, so so the trees of the earth rejoice, but also the men who've been captivated by Satan rejoice, because since he's been overcome, there is no tree feller that has opposed them. Verse 9, hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. This is the harrowing of hell doctrine. Remember, Jesus, upon his death, would visit the spirits in prison, according to Peter, and section 138 of the Doctrine and Covenants, and other places. The harrowing of hell is kind of how the early Christians referred to this episode. And here we get that hell's mouth would enlarge itself to receive her king, the king of Babylon, or Satan. The hell's jaws would be open to receive him there, and the kings that are also found there for a time, they would also have something to say to this satanic being. Hell from beneath is moved at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee. In other words, the spirits of the dead for thee. Even all the chief ones of the earth that spend time in hell, that will be in hell for a time. It hath raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations who were wicked, who had to suffer for a time in hell. All they shall speak and say, they will taunt thee as well, and say, art thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us, who have had to suffer in hell? So, King of Babylon, Satan, has become weak as those that he brought into captivity among the proud and the arrogant of the earth. They also will be in hell for a time, have a portion, suffer their portion, but Satan himself will be there for eternity. Verse 11, thy pomp, Satan, is brought down to the grave. The noise of thy vials is not heard. The worm is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. In other words, symbolically, you've died, you've suffered a death. But again, Satan has no body to decompose and so forth. It's just that he's always been spiritually dead since he fell from heaven. And it's the fall from heaven that's suggested in verse 12. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer? Now, Lucifer means light bearer, and it was his name premortally, or when he was a son of God in authority in the presence of God, and he aspired to the throne of God, which is suggested here going on. So how art thou fallen? The kings of the earth in hell are saying this and taunting him and saying, or they're asking of him, how is it you've fallen, and how is it that you're here? Son of the morning, art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations of the earth? For thou hast said in thy heart, in other words, Satan is the original boaster and arrogant and proud and rebellious being. He did exalt, he said, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, above all the sons of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation. In other words, I will sit in the highest places among the sons of God and the people of God, and in the sides of the north. I will ascend so high that I will even challenge the power of the Most High God. Okay, this has been the aspiration of Satan, and it was premortally, but he's since been cast to the earth, and now he's even partaking of he's partaking of the fires of hell and being mocked by his own those he took captive. He's now being mocked by them in a place called hell. In that place called hell. So he has ascended to the heights, but again he was cast down to the depths, and he's now being afflicted and taunted by the very people he had captivated. And they're wondering, where is your power? Where is your glory? Where is your pomp? Weren't you him that did weaken the nations? What has happened? Why has this all been reversed and turned on its head? And why has you who are why have you who are so powerful come to this ruination? And those are the questions of those the kings of the earth, and the high and mighty, and the powerful, that have been proud, and the learned, and the wise in their own eyes, and so forth. Now verse 15 says, "Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit," further imagery about hell. "They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee," have a low estimation of thee. You will be esteemed lightly. In other words, you'll be taken for naught, okay? Esteemed lightly, "and shall consider thee, and shall say, Is this the man that caused the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms?" In other words, they're in disbelief. This is amazing. You've been brought so low. How is this possible? "And made the world a wilderness, and destroyed the cities thereof, and opened not the house of your prisoners." In other words, you had captivated many prisoners. You had taken captive many people of many nations. How is it that you've become a captive? Okay. And verse 18, "All the kings of the nations, yea, all of them, will eventually lie in some degree of glory, some form of glory. Every one of them will have his own mansion." Verse 19, "But thou, Satan, art cast down to the grave like an abominable branch, and the remnant of those that are slain thrust through with the sword." In other words, your seed will be thrust through, symbolically in battle, in the spiritual battle, and you will come to death. "And all those that go down to the stones of the pit, and the carcass trodden under feet." So your armies will be destroyed. Okay, and in other words, a lot of this is corporeal imagery, and again, Satan has he's not embodied, but he's being described in embodied terms, just because it's the poetic, prophetic level of this. Verse 20, "Thou shalt not be joined with them in burial," with those of the high and the mighty, the military, the king of Babylon and his armies. You will not be joined with them in burial, and that is a great problem in the ancient world. Burial of the body was very important, and so when to say this is part of his cursing, you will not be buried, and that's again symbolic because he has no body. But the idea that you will have no burial, no ceremonial burial. Therefore, you're going to be your soul's in jeopardy forever and ever, because thou hast destroyed thy land and slain thy people. Okay, and the seed of evildoers shall never prosper. Okay, so Satan and his hosts will come to ruination, destruction, and they will suffer in hell. And Satan and his closest associates will suffer eternally as sons of perdition in hell. And evildoers on the earth, those that had been led captive and had done his bidding on earth, they will be eventually delivered from hell if they're not sons of perdition. But evildoers, the promise is, shall never in all eternity be renowned or inherit kingdoms of glory if they have sold their souls to the devil in the sense of becoming sons of perdition. But all those that have sold their souls to him in some other sense will eventually have a liberation from hell and enjoy a measure of glory, probably, depending on each individual person, of course, according to their works. Verse 21 says, prepare slaughter for his children. We're still speaking of the king of Babylon here. For the iniquities of their fathers that they do not rise, nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with cities. So Babylon's going to have an end, right? The king of Babylon is going to perish. Babylon as an empire will perish. And the thing is, this imagery from 21 to 23 is very much the desolate imagery of the end of chapter 23. Babylon will be ruined. He'll have no connections. Okay, Babylon, it will have no connections. The king of Babylon will have no connections. And the Lord will ruin him and desolate Babylon, so much so that nothing will be there. It will be swept. Verse 23 says, I will, the Lord speaking, also make it a possession for the bittern, meaning for the hedgehog or for the bird, and pools of water, swamp water, and I will sweep it. I love the verb sweep. I will sweep it with the broom of destruction. In other words, I will sweep it so, like, it's one thing to have kind of a leveled surface, but if you sweep it out, there's just nothing there, okay? So the image is utter flatness, okay, utter desolation, so much so that even the dirt is swept, okay? So I will sweep the floor clean and desolate you. Okay, that is what verse 23 is suggesting. It's super powerful, very interesting imagery. And again, Babylon will have no connections. Verse 22, I will take away, I will destroy and cut off from Babylon the name and the remnant and the son and the nephew. You will have no relations. You will be destroyed, and all of your family, your polluted relations will be destroyed and utterly abolished. While the people of the Lord are gathered, Babylon and all the world will be destroyed and separated and pulled apart and desolated. Okay, that's kind of what I'm gathering from this. Verse 24 through 27 is a covenant. The Lord is speaking powerfully in the spirit of authority about an oath he makes. And then verses 28 to 32 are about, well, it's kind of a mixture of things. We have some redemptive imagery, and we have a discussion of the Assyrian kings who will be successive that will bring judgments upon the Lord's people from time to time. So verse 24 says, the Lord of hosts hath sworn, that is, made covenant and made oath, sworn an oath, saying, surely as I have thought, so shall it come to pass, meaning I will establish Zion. Okay, the world will be destroyed, the nations of the world, the king of Babylon will be destroyed, and I will establish Zion. I will establish my people. And surely as I have thought it, so shall it come to pass. And as I have purposed, so shall it stand. In other words, all that I've prophesied of through my prophets, all that I've promised, all that I've all that will be fulfilled, because I am God, and I will bring my covenants to pass, and my promises will be fulfilled. Verse 25, that I will bring the Assyrian. Okay, now we're moving to the Assyrian as a representation of just wickedness across the earth. I will bring the Assyrian in my land, and I will tread him down upon my mountains. Then shall his yoke depart from off the shoulders of my people. Okay. Verse 26, this is the purpose that is purposed in all the nations of the earth. The enemies of the people of God will be devastated, and the burden they have put on my people will be taken off of their shoulders, and they will pay for it. And my people will be exalted, and they will be brought to a place of safety and refuge. This is the purpose that is purposed upon the whole earth. And this is the hand, my hand, that is stretched out in judgment over all of the nations that are drunken with iniquity. And verse 27, for the Lord of hosts hath purposed, and who shall disannul? And his hand is stretched out, and who? Now that the king of Babylon is destroyed, who shall turn it away? In other words, no one is as powerful. I am the Almighty. Satan, by the way, is not a parallel figure to God. He's parallel to Michael. He's not even parallel to the Messiah. The Messiah is the firstborn. And Satan was not equivalent even to the Messiah. Satan is one of the angels in authority formerly, before his fall, his rebellion. But he's not equivalent to God in any sense. God has always been more powerful than him. The Messiah is more powerful than him. Michael, another son of God, Adam, we call him Adam on earth. Satan may have had equivalency with him premortally. The thing is, God's plan and his purposes have never been in jeopardy, not even for one moment. And Satan's always been, he was always going to be destroyed and be bound by the righteousness of the people. When the people finally came to God and gave their hearts to God, Satan effectively would be bound, and in this case for 1,000 years, and God will establish his Zion and establish his work and his people across the whole earth. Now, verse 28, we shift into the discussion not from the Assyrians, but to the Philistines. And in the year that King Ahaz died, he was a wicked man. King Ahaz died. The Philistines are cautioned here. Rejoice not thou, all you Philistines. So Palestina means Philistines, because the rod of him that smote thee is broken. Now that could refer to Ahaz, or it could refer to the Assyrian king from verse 25, okay? Because the rod of him that smote thee is broken. For out of the serpent's root, Ahaz's root, or the king of Assyria's root, shall come forth a more poisonous serpent, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent. Okay, in other words, that language means that this serpent will be more deadly. This viper will be more deadly than the former viper. Okay, and again, we're probably referring to Assyrian kings here, or maybe Ahaz is being suggested here. Wicked Ahaz. Okay, now verse 30 and verse 32 are we end on a hopeful note, because the poor and the needy will be given places of safety in Zion, and God will bring judgment and kill Babylon's root, and of course the wicked of the earth and all those that oppress his people and afflict them and persecute them will be dealt with. Okay, that's verse 30. The poor and the needy will feed and shall lie down in safety, and will be taken care of, because Zion will have been established, and this is purposed in all the earth. And then verse 32 says, and then what shall answer the messengers or the envoys of the nation? That God has founded Zion, okay? That the Lord hath founded Zion, and the poor of his people shall trust in it. I like how Gileadi's translation ends here. He says, okay, let's see if I can find it. He says, okay, from the north shall come a pillar of smoke. That's the previous verse. And it says, and no place he has designed, God has designed, shall evade it, the destruction that's coming upon them. What shall then be told the envoys of the nation? And I assume the nation is the nation of Israel, the nation of Zion, the nation of God. The Lord has founded Zion. Let his long-suffering people find refuge there. And I like that ending a lot. Let his long-suffering people who've been oppressed and afflicted become a hiss and a byword among the nations for centuries and centuries. And all the house of Israel in their scattered condition, let them now, the long-suffering people of my ancient fold, those that have been scattered, find refuge now in Zion. And that is how this ends. And so Nephi has shared these things. Can you see how they relate to the former material, the end of First Nephi, and how it relates to the apocalyptic material that follows the block? So the block is a good choice by Nephi to connect to these other parts, because it's about redemption and about judgments. And we've spoken about redemption and judgment all along. And so I think that this choice of block of material is very, very useful, and I think very helpful to kind of convey the larger themes that Nephi, I think, is going for here. I want you to know that I have enjoyed my study of 1st and 2nd Nephi with you, although I hear very little back from people, so I don't always know, if it's been beneficial. Some have told me it is. I don't have a sense of who's exactly watching this, but again, I have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to if you want to, and I have also tried to post everything on Facebook. Hopefully you can get caught up. I don't know when I'm going to resume my videotaping of scripture discussions, but I probably will choose another book and do that fairly soon. I kind of enjoy it, and anyway, I want you to know that these things are true, and I love them. And I don't. There's nothing quite as much that I enjoy quite as much as being engaged with the Word of God. It tends to thrill my soul, and so I delight in the Scriptures, as does Nephi. Nephi said, "I delight in Isaiah. I delight in the Scriptures, and I write them that my people and my children might have them." And I'm just trying to pass on some things that may be of value. I delight in them enough that I wanted to make videos about them, and I do write about them as well. I have articles that I try to publish and things like that. So I am full of the spirit of a love of the Scriptures, and I think it's a similar spirit to what Nephi had and what the others had when they say, "I rejoice in the word of the Lord," and it's like honey unto me. Thank you for your time.